Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with Exemplify Health Center, your Wellness Way affiliate right here in Yorkville, Illinois. Happy Monday. Happy Labor Day, everybody. Yes, I am going live on Labor Day. And so I apologize I didn't do any announcements that we were going live. I was actually out of town with my sons for the whole weekend, and we had a wonderful time of some father-son bonding, and we just got back into town a couple of hours ago. So I'm still going to go live because even though it's Labor Day, there's still labor to be done, and it's to spend some time with you wonderful people. So if you are joining me right now, hey guys, please say hello. And please let me know where you're watching from. And as always, I always appreciate when you share these videos. I'm going to be talking about fertility part 3. What about women? So part 1, if you guys haven't watched it, just to get a little bit more, maybe some more context. Part 1, I talked about why some of these in vitro fertilizations and hormones and things like that that they do, these fertility treatments, why there's such a high failure rate. Also why they're so expensive. And then part 2, we talked about, in many cases, the man is just as responsible as infertility as the woman, and how that has to talk about what a man's lifestyle is and how that actually causes issues with development, strength, motility of the sperm. But today I'm going to talk about part 3, and it's probably going to be a little bit longer, so I appreciate your patience as we kind of navigate this whole thing. But a lot of times when you say fertility, people think, oh, it's just, it's usually the women's fault. It's not. Many times it's the man's fault. Guys, I will make this statement is conception should prepare for it. So you should take a good 4 to 5 months to prepare for conception in really cleaning up your lifestyle, really cleaning up inflammation, really cleaning up issues that are taking place in through the liver, especially for a woman. And so that way you are actually priming the egg and priming the sperm to have the best genetic potential for that future baby. So let's talk about it from from fertility from a woman's perspective, and it's going to be a little bit more in depth, just because when you have more hormones, you have more gears that are turning, especially when it comes to conception. Now let me make this statement, guys, and again, please make sure that you share this video. But I will always make bold statements. I will always make, you may call them controversial, but guys, when you have a problem with so many couples that are having problem with fertility, guys, doing the same thing over and over again and somehow expecting a different result, that is called the definition of insanity. And we're not asking the question, why are so many people having problems with something that we are technically biologically programmed to do? So many times people will come to me and say the doctors can't figure out infertility that is quote unquote unexplained. This has to do with a lot of other issues too, like fibromyalgia, for example, or depression, or things like that. As they just say, well, we don't really know why it's happening. It's probably just genetic or something like that. Here's how crazy this is, guys. Infertility can't be genetic because if it was genetic, then probably you wouldn't have been born. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to make a bold statement. It's this: there's no such thing as unexplained infertility. There's no such thing as unexplained infertility. In fact, what it is, it's just a lack of investigation. So guys, within the Wellness Way approach, for a lot of different issues that are happening, we dig deeper. We test deeper. And in fact, someone actually came to me and said, yeah, so-and-so, I know someone just died in their sleep, and they had a massive heart attack, and they were just given a clean bill of health a week before. All the tests were perfect. Well, guys, you don't have a heart attack if all your tests are perfect because you just haven't tested deep enough. And how many times have you known someone who died of unexplained causes, and no one dies of unexplained causes, or then they just say, well, it just must have been old age, and I'm like, old age, they were 52 years of age, or natural causes. And so we're just not testing deep enough, which is the case when that individual died in their sleep, at I think 61 years of age, and was given a clean bill of health. obviously there was a lack of investigation of actually testing deep enough. It just means that the doctor that was in charge of that person's health didn't investigate deep enough. So within the wellness way, we like to call ourselves crime scene investigators. We like to actually dig deeper in order to try to figure out the cause and then apply the Swiss watch principle to say, hey, here's how these organ systems are actually being affected. Which is why, guys, when you look at the Swiss watch principle, guys, if you can have a gastrointestinal issue, can affect your skin. A gastrointestinal system can actually affect your brain chemistry. A problem with the nerve system can cause a problem in the digestive system. And the reason why is we understand, we know how all of these things work together. So it's not, there's no such thing as unexplained fertility. It's just that the doctors haven't dug deep enough, okay? So I'm going to go over with you 4 main reasons, biggest reasons for female infertility. And yes, there can be some anatomical variations and things like that, but I'm going to talk about the big things, okay? Things that can solve a lot of problems. And the 4 biggest things I'm going to talk to you guys about is, number 1, biggest reason for female infertility. I'm going to say this is probably number 1 reason is something involving the immune system and the inflammatory response. Number 2 is that this can be due to stress, either mental or it can also be due to physical stress. And when I talk about physical stress, I'm talking about what is going on within the actual spinal neurological system, but I'm also going to talk about the idea of exercise, particularly over-exercise and overtraining. And I'm going to talk about insulin resistance and how that actually plays a role with actually the female cycle, the release of the egg. And I'm going to talk about hormone metabolism, the ability of a woman to be able to clear out specific hormones, that mainly being your estrogens, or be able to convert them into weaker forms. And that mostly is a problem within the liver. And so guys, when I explain all of these, this is going to make a lot of sense. But then at the end, I'm going to show you, here's what we do to our young girls, here's what we do to our teenage girls, and here's how we mislead them. And then when it's the time for them to actually need to conceive or want to start a family, start to have children, then all of a sudden we just expect everything to start to work normal when we've been manipulating it for the last 10, 15, or 20 years. So I'll show you how, in the system that you live in, why you've been led down a very bad path, and how doctors are actually, when these problems are happening, they're going to just chemically manipulate hormones, and then that's going to lead a lot of women down the point of having fertility treatments that are going to be very stressful, that are going to be very expensive, that are going to be just absolutely agonizing to these specific people, when it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So guys, I want to show you a different way. And many times when you show a person a different way, especially when they're not ready, is that it's met with a lot of resistance. It's actually met with a lot of emotion. It's actually met with a lot of anger. And guys, you know, and if you're feeling that way, I get it. I understand it. But I want you to hear me out and showing you that there's a better way within the wellness way approach, okay? So I want to show you guys this, because so many times people will say, well, how could you understand you're not a woman, okay? Obviously, Dr. Nate, you can't understand anything about female fertility. You have to be a woman. And I'm saying, well, that's interesting, because go ahead and draw out for me your hormone cycle over 28 days. And many times they'll have no idea of their hormone cycle, on where the estrogens, estradiol, and where the progesterone is supposed to be when they have a testosterone spike, things that can actually start to deplete progesterone, and they really don't have any idea. And so just remember, we're just talking about physiology, and to say they have to be a woman to understand women's physiology, or have to be a man to understand men's physiology is going to be physiology. So many times the woman herself can't explain about their hormones, and so all we are doing within the wellness way is we're filling in a gap, and we're trying to help people. So guys, when you look at this over your 28-day cycle, here's the first 7 days. You're going to see low hormones, and that's one of the reasons why, especially at the end, as you get into day 28, you're going to see a drop in progesterone in order to maintain the endometrium. And then when that happens, you see a drop in progesterone or estradiol as well, and you're going to see that will cause lack of proliferation of the endometrial lining. And then what's going to happen is that progesterone won't be able to maintain it, so you're going to lose the endometrial lining. Basically, it's the body saying, hey, we're going to get ready. We didn't get pregnant, so we're going to get ready for another cycle as well. And so what actually builds the endometrial lining is anabolic tissue known as estradiol. So when you see at about day 7, you're going to see a high spike in estradiol that's going to start to build the endometrial lining, getting ready for fertilization. You're going to see lower progesterone levels, but you're going to see them start to climb up. And then at day 14, you're going to actually see a spike in testosterone. And the reason why is because as that egg is getting released, the body wants to fertilize it, and it's the best time. What does testosterone actually do? Well, it actually is going to spike sexual desire. So you'll see a spike in a woman when it comes to their sexual desire. And then from day 14 to 21, you're going to see that progesterone levels absolutely climb. And the reason why it has to climb is in order to maintain that endometrial lining in case that the egg actually gets fertilized. And then you're going to see it drop down at that point. So you're going to see that the best time that this uterine lining is going to be at its most robust is going to be, day 17, 21, a little bit after that, because that's when that egg is going to make its way down the fallopian tube and then embed itself in the endometrial lining, and you're going to have a highly vascular rich tissue in order for that pregnancy to be able to take place. As those hormones start to go down, that's when you'll actually release that endometrial lining, and then you get ready for that another cycle. But here's what's so interesting is that when you see that you have a need for progesterone in that specific time frame, especially from day 14 up until day 21, I always tell women, this is the time that you need to be the less stressed. This is the time you need to exercise the least. This is the time where stress should be at its minimum, because there's a specific stress hormone that will rob you of your progesterone. I'm going to go over that in just a second. So guys, this is just basic physiology, but I don't even think they teach this actually in school, okay? Now, let's go over those 4 things that I talked to you about, okay? Number 1 is going to be immune, and we're talking about an inflammatory process. The biggest things I'm going to say that women suffer with, because remember this, usually they come in, they feel they don't have any energy, they have issues with fatigue, they have a menstrual cycle that is not normal, and so they don't feel very good, and so they think, well, my thyroid must be bad, or there's something wrong with my hormones, and doctors want to throw birth control at it, bioidentical hormones, things like that. And I always will say that hormones make you feel lousy, but they're not the reason why you feel lousy. Hormones respond, they don't cause. Hormones will make you feel bad, but they're not the reason why you're sick. Number 1 reason why is going to be due to something that's involving the immune system. So look at all the different areas that are going to involve the immune system. One is in the gastrointestinal system. So guys, if you've ever heard of leaky gut or gastrointestinal hyperpermeability, if you have a breakdown of that barrier of the gastrointestinal system within the small intestine, excuse me, one of the things you're going to develop is you're going to develop what's known as a lot of food allergies. I always laugh when doctors say, yeah, that's just what you've been exposed to. And I say, well, then they don't understand that the small intestinal is actually considered a barrier. And so if you have developed a lot of different food allergies, yes, you have been exposed to it. And yes, it's not supposed to be exposed to it, which is why testing food allergies is so important. And it has literally changed so many people's lives. So having multiple food allergies is going to cause an inflammatory response around the gastrointestinal barrier. You can even see this on even some basic blood work as well. How about this one? Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. SIBO is what they call it. So you have literally your microbiome is supposed to live in the large intestine, and if you start to have an environment that will favor the overgrowth of bacteria within the small intestine, you can actually get that bacteria within the colon start to creep into the small intestine. Guys, a lot of this has to do with stress, has to do a lot with how much stomach acid that you're making, how well you're breaking down your food, bile acid metabolism, the release of bile acids from your gallbladder, and it just creates a better environment for that bacteria to start to crawl into this small intestine, which is why when people do have SIBO, they will notice that there is going to be a lot of bloating because there's a difference in the diameter. Colon has a diameter of this, small intestine has a diameter of this. So when you see fermentation start to take place within the small intestines, why people suffer with so much bloating, particularly after they eat. Then you also have candida. let me say this, Candida is considered a yeast. Candida is actually normal growth. It's normal within the large intestine, but once again, that you start to have an environment that will favor the overgrowth of Candida, like eating a lot of sugar, for example, like having low stomach acid, then again, you can start to have Candida overgrowth, and yes, you can actually measure this as well. One thing that a lot of people don't look at is actually having issues with mold. Guys, if someone has a problem with mold, I always tell people they never test for it. It's one of those strange things. But again, we have a lot of people who are coming in that have been sick for years and haven't figured out any kind of answers. And so if someone does have an issue when it comes to mold, first thing that we tell people is you got to get out of the environment to see if you can recover. Now, some people do get out of the environment. Yes, they do recover, but some people cannot remove the mold toxicity from their bodies with their immune system, which means they're always going to have what's known as an innate inflammatory response, which is very severe, which is very nonspecific, and so they're constantly always being inflamed with their innate immune system. This is why when people have mold, their hormones are out of whack, they have no energy, their adrenals are massively downregulated, they'll have kidney issues, gastrointestinal issues, many times they'll have thyroid issues, many times they'll have very, very low melatonin, a lot of times they'll just have extreme thirst, they'll urinate a lot, but mold is an immune system issue. So are viral infections. Now, if you look at cytomegalovirus, herpes viruses, if you look at chronic fatigue viruses, all of these things are, a lot of times we already have them within our body, but they will start to reemerge when other stressors start to bring the immune system down, and these viruses have an ability to be able to start replicating faster. So Epstein-Barr virus, chronic fatigue syndrome, is actually one of them. It's why people say, well, I have Epstein-Barr. I'm like, well, congratulations, 90% of people do. It's just the fact that you have knocked your body down so much where this virus now can start to grow, and you have an inhibited immune response to those specific things. And then obviously you'll have autoimmunity. Guys, autoimmunity is not the body attacking itself. Body doesn't attack itself. That's like spraining your ankle and it getting swollen and it getting red and getting hot and it hurts, and you're saying, yeah, I'm having an autoimmune reaction to my ankle. Autoimmunity is literally just a body just cleaning up damaged tissue. They name the autoimmune reaction depending on where it's actually happening at, and there's over 100 different autoimmune reactions that they actually have diagnosed, whether they're in the parotid gland, whether they are actually in the vascular system, whether they are in the gastrointestinal system, whether they are to the thyroid. They just name it basically according to that. It's the body cleaning out damaged tissue, and many times autoimmunity is the result of having things like these things that are taking place, okay? And viral infections. Many times this is the result, or it can also be the result of putting a foreign body within the body. Case in point, things like breast implants, especially, joint implants, things like that. So look at all the different things that can involve the immune system. So if you're someone that is suffering with infertility right now, start looking and start testing properly when it comes to your immune system, because remember, hormones respond, they do not cause. Hormones respond, they do not cause, and they can respond 100% to inflammatory triggers. Number 2, guys, is stress. Let's talk about stress, because every time I say stress, everybody's like, oh my gosh, I am so stressed. And we live in a society today where actually stress is actually encouraged and applauded. The whole idea of the busyness syndrome is, man, the more that I can put my kids into different activities, different sports, the more I can run myself ragged every single day for 6 days a week, man, that just means that I'm a good mom, that I'm a good dad. And meanwhile, our health suffers. And you actually ask the child, and they're like, but I just want mom to be healthy. I want dad to be healthy. I didn't actually sign up, to be in sports for 18 hours a week. I actually just want to have fun. And so many times we overcompensate by doing so many extra activities, with having the banner of busyness, but it comes at a cost, especially when you do it over and over and over for months and years and years. And this particularly will affect a woman much more than it will affect a man. I'm going to show you why in just a second, okay? So let's talk about stress. Let's talk about mental stress especially, okay? Here's some different reasons when we talk about stress when it comes specifically to a woman. So number 1, undereating. Okay, I'm going to show you why in just a second. So under eating. Number 2, overexercise. Okay. Number 3, fasting. So doing this whole idea of fasting, I have so many women who say, I feel great when I fast. And I'm like, well, are you of the age in which you are cycling? They say, yes, but I feel great when I'm fasting. Guys, the reason why you probably feel great is because when you fast for 2, 3, 4 days, you completely take your immune system out of the digestive process, which, yeah, you're going to actually feel better because you're going to have less bloating, probably going to have less fatigue, but at the end of the day, you're also going to mess up your menstrual cycle, which is why I always ask people, hey, why are you fasting? Instead of fasting, you can also take your immune system out of the digestive process by actually getting a proper food allergy test and actually looking at the barrier integrity around the gastrointestinal system. So if you are under eating or over exercising or fasting, there's going to be something that's known as a hormone known as leptin. Okay, leptin is actually considered the hunger hormone, and so the body will signal when it needs to eat. It will signal when it doesn't need to eat, and obviously with low leptin, what happens is you're going to feel like, oh man, I don't need to eat anymore. This, you can run into so many issues, and the reason why is that the fat cells actually release leptin. So the less body fat a woman has, then what happens is there's going to be less and less leptin, and so leptin is actually considered a huge hormone when it comes to your fertility signals, especially up in through the hypothalamus pituitary gland, known as follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So low leptin. Now here's what's really interesting, okay, is that when people actually have high leptin, when they have a high amount of body fat, then you also develop something known as leptin resistance. And so they thought leptin was the answer, that maybe if we gave people who were overweight, we just gave them a bunch of leptin, they won't be so hungry all the time. But those people don't have problems with leptin, they have problems hearing the signals of leptin, and it's called leptin resistance, just as the same way you can develop insulin resistance to a hormone. You can also develop nicotine resistance. You can develop resistance to any kind of chemical in which it acts on a specific tissue if it is there in high amounts because it down-regulates receptors for it. But when you're talking about a woman with under-eating, over-exercise, or who does an extreme amount of fasting, it's going to tell the brain, hey, I am underfed, and this is not a good time to have a baby at this point, okay? So look at this article, and it says leptin is an effective treatment for hypothalamic amenorrhea. So I want you to think of young girls, for example, doing extreme amounts of exercise. So, gymnastics is a huge one. Why do you think the gymnasts don't have a menstrual cycle until they stop doing gymnastics? In many cases, if you actually look at even in the sport of CrossFit, which, guys, I actually own a CrossFit gym, but I do have some issues with some of the female athletes having very, very too low a body fat, but for the sport, having low body fat actually makes them better at the sport. But there's a difference between sport and there's a difference between health. And so that's why many times you say, hey, if a woman has a six-pack, their leptin level is going to be really, really low, and they're not going to be having a normal menstrual cycle. And so, of course, when you look at medicine says, what's the answer for this? Rather than actually fix the reason why, they said, well, maybe we can just start giving women leptin in order to fix their menstrual issues. So what they say is hypothalamic, which is basically an area within the brain, amenorrhea, or lack of menstrual cycle, is associated with dysfunction of the hypothalamic pituitary peripheral endocrine axis, leading to infertility and bone loss, and usually is caused by chronic energy deficiency secondary to strenuous exercise and or decreased food intake. So what is it caused by? Undereating and overexercise, which is the case in many, many young women when it comes to the fact that they're overexercising and undereating. Why are they overexercising? Because a lot of girls now are playing sports year-round. They're playing sports for 5-6 days a week for 2 to 3 hours, and then also they see things on the internet, and they see women with six-packs, and they see that they're supposed to be skinny. Sometimes even the coaches, sometimes even the male coaches who have no idea the difference between men and women are telling them you need to be lighter, you need to lose weight. And in reality, they're trying to get themselves down to a body weight that is going to make them infertile and is going to cause some damage down the road. So the issue is not to start taking leptin. The issue is that you need to start eating more, start exercising less, and actually put on some body fat in order to start to get the hypothalamic pituitary to the ovaries to get that feedback loop working the way that it's supposed to, okay? The second thing when it comes to stress is mental stress. So you have under-eating, over-exercise, fasting, leading to low leptin, which can really start to wreak havoc within that hormone system or that feedback loop. But then number two is having a high amount of mental stress. So this is so true, whether it's young girls, 13, 14 years of age, all the way up into 45, 50 years of age, is this whole idea of mental stress, guys. Being mentally stressed should not be, a banner that you should be proud of, because I'm going to show you in just a second how it will cause problems with the actual fertility cycle. So here's what you have. When you look at the sex hormone pathway, these are all of the sex hormones, and notice at the very top in the yellow is actually cholesterol. Guys, I will keep saying this until the day that I die, is that when your cholesterol goes up, it's for a very specific reason, because your body never messes up. And if a doctor comes to you and says, oh wow, your cholesterol is really high, your liver is kicking out LDL for a very specific reason. There's healing or hormone function that needs to take place. And then instead of just saying, let's figure out why the body is doing this, they just want to manipulate an enzyme pathway within the liver to try to lower your cholesterol output without ever figuring out why. In fact, I had a gentleman, the other day who, as soon as he went on this cholesterol-lowering drug, he suffered with sexual performance and impotence issues. Well, cholesterol is the backbone of testosterone production. I said, no duh, is that you're going to go on that and you're going to have a problem with sexual performance. There's other reasons why. He also had some of those reasons too, but one of the biggest things too is a decline in testosterone. So guys, cholesterol is the most important thing. You need it. Now, if you look at this, it makes the most abundant hormone in the body that's known as pregnenolone, but you see pregnenolone is converted into progesterone. That can actually be converted a little bit in the adrenal glands. This mainly during your cycle is converted within the actual ovary with the egg that is released, corpus luteum, okay? So think about this. It's made into progesterone, but there's another pathway that it can go down, and it can also go into the production of cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. Now, we tend to vilify cortisol like it's some kind of bad thing, but when you are under a high amount of mental stress specifically, is that the body says, I don't care about your fertility right now. What I care about is your ability to be able to run away from the bear. Now, the body doesn't care if it's real, doesn't care if it's perceived, it doesn't care. So whether it's a real stress or a perceived stress, it will always go down the pathway of making more cortisol. In fact, we just had a wonderful young woman who's had fertility issues, and we measure her cortisol levels, and they were at 30 in the morning. They should not be over 21. And so one of the things that we are doing in order to help her with her fertility cycle is I say, hey, you need to figure out why you're so stressed. And we understand one of the reasons why is because there's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety actually caused by serotonin production within the gastrointestinal system because she was so inflamed, because she had a gastrointestinal hyperpermeability, which will affect things like anxiety and things like that. And I said, let's try to see if we can dull this stress response, which is why she's on high-dose ashwagandha and California poppy and dosing it throughout the whole entire day. And I said, listen, this is not a long-term fix. We got to figure out why this is happening. But in the meantime, we are going to blunt that as much as possible, because if you can't, your GI system's never ever going to be able to recover. And so this is why the body will always prefer stress hormone, because it always wants to get you out of the crisis. It always wants to get you out of the emergency more than it cares about your fertility, okay? So this is why mental stress is such an important thing when it comes to your fertility. This is also why if you want to keep elevating your cortisol levels, don't get enough sleep. So stay awake and have cortisol levels elevated for a longer period of time throughout the day. And that way it's just going to keep increasing cortisol production from your adrenal glands, which will also play a role. So many times people say, people who are hormone experts, they say, you need to get sleep. I say, all right, can you tell me why? And they're like, I don't know, it's just something that you need to do. It's the same thing, guys, when you talk about melatonin. I say, why would you recommend melatonin? Well, because it helps you sleep. No, it doesn't. So, actually, melatonin, that's a secondary effect. Primary effect of melatonin is repair. It's your repair hormone, which is why when people have so much elevations of inflammation systemically, particularly when it's involving crossing the blood-brain barrier, they will have some big-time issues when it comes to melatonin production. So that's why, guys, when you're so systemically inflamed, you don't sleep very well over time, and innately you want to take melatonin. But the reality is we give melatonin people actually to help with cellular healing, cellular repair. It's an antioxidant. So progesterone, and we call that the progesterone steal, is that it's got to come from somewhere, so the body will rob progesterone in order to make more cortisol. And if you are low in progesterone, this is why you can't maintain your endometrial lining, especially after you ovulate, which is why a lot of women, they undergo a lot of stress, why their menstrual cycles tend to be short. Rather than going 27, 28, 29 days, they're going 23 days, 22 days. And when it gets really bad, they're actually only going 16 or 17 days. And they think, man, I'm having a period almost every, like 3 weeks, it seems like. So that's the idea behind mental stress. And then the last one is not only mental, but it's also going to be physical stress, okay? So this is physical stress and the role that it plays with cortisol production. When we talk about cortisol production and physical stress, this is huge because one of the things that you can see is if someone is in a car accident, for example, and has a tremendous injury to their neck, and they have an injury to the neck. And actually, guys, the neck has so many what are known as mechanoreceptors going back to the brain, and the spine, the actual joints of the spine are really giving the brain feedback as far as position, as far as alignment, and where they're at in space. And if you hurt the neck, guys, most of your proprioception or joint awareness in your body is actually in through the upper part of the neck. And when you hurt it, you can play as a huge, huge role in cortisol release. Which is why I've seen people after having an auto accident, they say, you know what, after I was in the auto accident, I developed autoimmunity. No, you didn't. It was just probably you had a reactivation after an injury of some viral issues and things like that. Now the body is actually trying to clean it up, okay? So let me ask you a question. This is why, guys, you have to address the physical frame, even when you're talking about female fertility. So when you look at this, here's the eyes, here's the teeth, here's the back of the head. You can actually see there's no space right in through there. That's actually slamming down the skull on the atlas that involves a nerve going back up to the back of the head, which is why so many women have headaches in the back of the head that radiates around to the front. That nerve is just getting squeezed and damaged, and it's causing spasm of those muscles called the suboccipital muscles. Number two, you should have a curve in the neck. So it should follow this red line when this person is looking this way, and you can actually see that this person has what's known as a cervical kyphosis. Kyphosis means you have a reversed curve in your neck, which is basically like taking the spinal cord in a relaxed position and then starting to stretch it out and then bending it in the wrong direction this way, which is going to cause the spinal cord to get stretched and tethered, and the diameter of that spinal cord starts to flatten out and do this. Now, an extension of your brain is the spinal cord. So do you think the brain says, I am under a lot of stress when it comes to neurologically? Absolutely. And in fact, on an MRI, you can see this, how the brainstem starts to get pulled down, how the cerebellum, which is responsible for a lot of your joint awareness and your balance coordination, starts to get pulled down into the spine and into the spinal canal. But you will see how this area starts to get flattened out and it starts to get damaged. This is going to cause an increased cortisol response, which the body will chronically be in a perpetual state of fight or flight. And again, if the body is in fight or flight, then what it's going to do is continue to steal progesterone for cortisol production, which is why after injury, you can start to see changes when it comes to your menstrual cycle, okay? So wow, we have gone over a lot of stuff. If you guys are enjoying this, please make sure that you share this video. And also, guys, if you're watching this on replay, just go ahead and put replay. Let me know also as well in the comments where you are watching from, okay? So insulin resistance, here's another one. This is really due to the overconsumption of sugar. Now there's other reasons why there can be insulin resistance. It can be due to sugar, yes. It can also be due to a decrease in short-chain fatty acids. It can within the gastrointestinal system, the large intestine, and it can also be due to having a chronic stress response over and over and over again. So yes, it can be due to cortisol. This is why you have to look at all of these different things. When you talk about excess sugar, this is going to create an issue with polycystic ovarian syndrome. So now you have a problem with actually the ovulation. So you have the development, the maturation of the egg, and it should be released from the ovary, and it doesn't get released, and instead of getting released, it basically just forms a cyst on the outside of the ovary, and that cyst can continue to grow and grow and grow, and it's extremely painful. So with this, excess insulin is going to shift your sex hormone balance to promote testosterone production over estrogen production, which can inhibit ovulation and compromise the quality of your eggs. Now remember this, because I've talked about a lot of this with men, is that, hey, one of the reasons why long-term you have such a problem with testosterone is actually because of sugar. But I want you to think in the initial stages, the consumption of sugar and insulin, because insulin is a very muscle-building hormone. When initially it is that way, a lot of sugar will promote testosterone production, which is actually why when you look at a lot of bodybuilders and when you look at a lot of like strength athletes, like powerlifters, the consumption of sugar will lead to tremendous muscle growth, especially if they're actually using exogenous testosterone in conjunction with that. And so they develop tremendous amount of power, tremendous amount of strength. But what's interesting is they also don't live very long, and they're usually, their lifespan is, probably in the late 50s or early 60s, and they die of cardiovascular disease. So this is why if you are suffering with PCOS, you really, really not should just be testing just your A1C, you should be testing your insulin levels. And I'm going to actually show you an example of someone with PCOS right now when you look at your labs. So this individual had an issue with PCOS, had had it for years, not just for a couple of years, but for probably 15 years. And so you can see hemoglobin A1C is at 6.6, and this is a pretty young woman, so she is type 2 diabetic. You can also see liver enzymes extremely elevated, so that's pointing to, hey, there's a problem with the liver. There's also going to be a problem with hormone metabolism big time, and insulin levels should be no higher than 25. Ideally, they should be at about 3 to 5, and you can see insulin levels at 52. Low vitamin D as well, but you also see reverse T3, which is actually the body putting the brakes on your thyroid hormone, going really, really sky high, and the body saying, whoa, we're sick, we need to lower the metabolism here quite a bit. So when you look at this with PCOS, you'll see this big time with the insulin levels, hemoglobin A1C, and you probably will see some elevated liver enzymes, which is what we see in PCOS quite a bit, okay? So you gotta start looking at, is the issue related to insulin? Is it related to the overconsumption of simple sugars especially, okay? Now number 4 is hormone metabolism. So not only do you have to be able to make the hormones, but you also have to be able to metabolize and remove the hormones. This is so important. And this is why, as women get older and they keep doing damage to their liver, this is why their menstrual cycles get worse. This is why menopause is so bad for them. Because menopause, guys, is not an illness. It is a normal, healthy transition. And many times the reason why women feel so badly at menopause is because some of their hormones were hiding some of the symptoms when they had specific hormones in higher amounts. When those hormones start to go down and now it shifts towards more of your adrenal glands than from the ovaries, that's when they start to notice, wow, there's a lot of changes that are taking place and I'm not feeling very good. So you have to look at metabolism or the removal of hormones and how they're converted. And this is, guys, a liver issue, which is one of the most neglected organs in through the body. If you've ever seen a Dutch test, dried urine total comprehensive hormone, many times when people are having issues with fertility, especially when it comes to the women, we will measure some inflammatory markers, yes. We will measure it in the blood, which is production, but we'll also measure the metabolism by looking at a urinalysis, okay? So the liver actually processes that. Some of it is actually removed through the gallbladder, some of it's removed through the kidneys, and so this is looking at how it's getting removed through the kidneys with urine, okay? Now, here's what's so interesting is, guys, these are all of your estrogens, okay? This is what's interesting, your estrogens. And so you should see all of these equal, and you see one right here, high estradiol, very, very low estriol. And guys, estriol is a weaker form of estrogen. And so many times when a woman has a very high amount of estradiol, it can be converted into estriol. In fact, this is the one that is getting produced, especially during pregnancy. This is actually one that makes women feel very good, gives them very nice hair, very nice skin. But you see this woman, she cannot convert it over from estradiol into estriol. There's an enzyme right there that's responsible for it, CYP3A4. And there's literally all of these different enzymes that sit mostly in the liver, gastrointestinal system, in the brain as well. And so if they are very deficient in those enzymes, there's going to be a really hard time converting things over. This is actually a classic case of what is known as endometriosis. And guys, doctors will never run this, but if you have a hormone pathway that looks like this, very, very, very common for women to have endometriosis, which is different than PCOS. Just remember, this estradiol is very anabolic. It's going to produce a lot of endometrial tissue. And so you have to convert these things and be able to remove it through the liver. But you can see on that pathway, this person is actually having a really bad day. Interesting note, something like St. John's wort can be really beneficial for this people while you start to clean out those pathways. And now everyone runs out and tries to decide that they want St. John's wort. Guys, you have to work with a doctor who knows when you should take it, when you shouldn't take it, because these will speed up these specific enzyme pathways, which also, if you're on medications and stuff, can actually speed up the removal of certain medications, which is a definite no-no if people are on things like serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, antidepressants specifically, because they can actually deplete the body of the medication that they're taking and actually cause a depletion of serotonin, which will leave you with what is known as serotonin syndrome, okay? So this is why you got to know when it's good and when it's not good at that point. So this is a classic case of endometriosis, okay? So all it does is, if you cannot remove those hormones and metabolize them through the liver, then you're also going to have a very bad day. You keep making endometrial tissue, and then you don't remove that endometrial tissue every single month. You're going to start building that endometrial tissue layer upon layer upon layer. It's also called adenomyosis, which is a little bit different, but endometriosis too. And you can get that tissue that can start to grow and be very receptive to estradiol in different parts of the body, even outside of the body cavity as well. But I will tell you, when women start to have problems with PCOS, endometriosis, problems with stress, guess what the number one thing the doctors do is, rather than try to figure out the reason why, they just put these women on birth control. And yes, it may, by manipulating hormones, may regulate the menstrual cycle, but guys, all it is covering up a much deeper problem. And I'm going to show you why that is so bad, okay? Here's why it's so bad. And I want to take you on a journey a little bit to see why a lot of the fertility problems actually started when a woman was very young, okay? So why are there so many fertility problems today? It's not that all of a sudden you wake up and you say, wow, I just couldn't have a baby. I don't know where this came from, but I want you to think of it. You have a child and you give them junk food, okay? Why junk food? Well, because the reason why there's junk food, which is going to be high in sugar, high insulin response, not only that, high in hydrogenated oils, partially hydrogenated oils. Those things are very tough on the liver. High fructose corn syrup, very tough on the liver, and because the liver has to process it, and the more you do it, the more work that you're doing for the liver, more work you're doing with the liver, the more it's going to get inflamed, the more inflamed it's going to do, the more it's going to decrease the ability to be able to clear out specific hormones, but also be able to detoxify, things like that. This is why you see 625 gallbladder, 1,000 gallbladder surgeries every single year. And then you have year-round sports. We don't allow any children the ability to have an off season that is just saying, hey, you're going to take a break for the next 3 to 4 months, let your body heal, let your body recover, let your hormones recover, where you can cross train or do something different. But now they're just playing year-round sports, which is why injuries are unbelievable. Guys, I may do a whole thing about childhood injuries and things like that, but I'll say something that's also very, very bold. If you have a child that is in travel sports, whether it be baseball, whether it be volleyball, whether it be basketball, or they're playing, training year-round for football, if they can't hang from a bar for at least 2 minutes, like a dead hang, if they can't hold themselves down in a perfect squat for 5 or 6 minutes at a time, if they can't do this, just those 2 basic things, then they should not be doing any kind of advanced movement training when it comes to baseball, when it comes to learning how to vertical jump, when it comes to learning how to serve or anything like that, because you are trying to teach your child to do something that's an advanced movement when they are physically immature, which is why you see so many injuries in youth sports today. So they're year-round sports, which is a stressor. You will see many girls hit early puberty. If you're hitting puberty, at 9 or 10 years of age, I always will say the number one thing that will make a child hit early puberty is actually insulin. So the more you're giving them high sugar foods, high starchy foods, a lot of grains and things like that, you will just make them hit puberty that much earlier, which means that they're going to be very hormone dominant and probably having liver problems at that point. And then sometimes it can be too much exercise, but sometimes it can be not enough exercise. So kids need exercise, there's no doubt about it, but they actually need to learn how to exercise correctly. So you look at a child with junk food, year-round sports, some of them aren't doing any exercise, many of them are hitting early puberty, and we're not asking the question at that point, wow, something should be wrong. Guys, I will actually, full disclosure, I hit puberty really early, or earlier than I think what you're supposed to, because I think really boys should be hitting puberty around 13, 14 years of age, but I hit it at 11 years of age. The number one reason why was because I had elevated insulin because I ate a lot of junk food. That was my choice too. And so again, it's very anabolic, which is why kids are hitting puberty earlier and earlier than when they're supposed to, okay? Now, think about this. We go in as a child and that starts to happen, and we ignore it, okay? But then when the young woman, when she hits her menstrual cycle, immediately they have menstrual problems. They may also develop acne, okay? Acne usually is an indication that for a girl there's going to be high androgens, so high amount of testosterone. Can be a GI issue, can actually be a vitamin A deficiency big time. But as a teenager, think about they're already developing menstrual problems. They already have acne. They may have a high amount of stress because of school, because of sports. They may also be over-exercising. So they may be exercising way too much, especially if they're doing some kind of track or they're doing a sport, many times with a man coach who is then hammering, you need to be at a low body weight, because lower body weight, the better I'm going to be able to perform. And so they'll start over-exercising without paying attention to their cycle. Because again, the time that you should be paying very attention to not being stressed or over-exercised particularly is going to be in day 14 to 21. The next time that you should be paying attention to should be when you start your menstrual cycle until about day 5, day 6, or day 7. There's really only about 2 weeks out of the month that a woman you can exercise as much as you want without hurting progesterone particularly. So they have all these problems, and what happens? What do? We say, oh, well, let's take her to the doctor. Don't run any tests, no Dutch testing, no hormone testing, no blood testing. They're not looking at inflammatory markers, not testing for food allergies. They're not testing for inflammatory markers, food allergies. They're not testing for insulin levels. That's what I wanted to say. And they're just saying, well, we're just going to go on birth control. That should solve your problems. So then usually they're putting them on a progesterone-based and if that works, progesterone-based birth control, if that works, then you know that the problem is overstressed. That's the reason. They're stealing their progesterone in order to make cortisol. They're not even measuring cortisol as well. So then they go birth control. Wow, the acne got better. wow, my menstrual cycle got a little bit more regulated, and so now they just go on birth control in order to regulate their menstrual cycle, okay? Because I used to think they put people on birth control because you didn't want to get pregnant. Now they actually need it in order to regulate a normal menstrual cycle. So again, why are there so many fertility problems? Think about this. This goes on from the time that a young girl is 3 years of age up until the time that now they want to have kids. They might be 25, they might be 30, they might be 35 years of age, but they've continued living that same life. They've continued to be misled by their doctor, and then when it's time to have kids, doctor says, well, you need to discontinue your birth control, and then somehow these problems that have been building for years are just somehow supposed to be corrected on their own. And so when that happens, it doesn't correct on their own. There's been no change with their lifestyle. There's been no healing that's taken place in the gastrointestinal system, no healing taking place in the liver. There's been nothing in order to lower the stressors. There's been nothing in order to increase any kind or decrease any kind of physical traumas or physical stressors as well. It's just go off the birth control and then start trying, and then they try and try and try, and then they can't because nothing has ever been corrected. And then, of course, they don't work, okay? And of course, they don't get pregnant. They can't get pregnant. So then it says, okay, well, now it's time to consider fertility treatments that will cost you, on average, a 1 in 4 success rate, and then approximately about $50,000. Well, insurance covers it. That's not the point, okay? Is that we are trying to have babies when the body says, I don't want to because I'm not well and I'm not healthy. And just think of this. There's another bold statement. You shouldn't try to put a bun in the oven if the oven doesn't want to work. If the oven's not working, figure out why the oven isn't working and get your health back before you are trying those things. Now, do some people get to a point where they absolutely need this? Absolutely. Yes, there is. But you should actually get your health back and start to heal the eggs, start to heal the sperm, because you still are using your own genetic material, and it needs to be as healthy as possible. So of course it isn't going to work, and then they go into fertility treatments. So guys, I'm going to tell you this, is that we have been led down a very bad path. It's been a very, very bad path, and you're seeing it continue to get worse and worse and worse. And it's a path that leads people to believe that they are broken. And that is just one of the things that just, it breaks my heart, is when people don't understand how powerful they are. They just believe that they are broken. They believe that they are supposed to be sick when the body genetically says, I am designed to adapt, I'm designed to be healthy, I'm designed to be well, and that there is no real reason, there is no such thing as sickness. It really should be called an adaptation to try to help you live longer. The body is always trying to adapt. And then once it can't adapt, that's when you should actually be calling it sickness. So it's a path that leads people to believe that they're broken, when in reality, it's the system. It's not the person that's broken. Let me say that again. The reality is that it's the system that's broken. It's the system that you're in. It's not the person that is broken. And too many times we're led down a bad path in which the person believes that they're broken, but that the system they're in is their savior. And that's certainly not true the longer that you start to see the system that we are in. And it is actually time that we start to choose a different system. Remember, when it's not working, doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. And it is time to say, maybe the system that I'm in isn't working. Maybe I need to find a new system, a system that's going to make sense, a system that's going to get to the cause, a system that's going to honor what God gave us, a system that's going to work with me and not manipulate me. And let me ask you a question. Do you want to be manipulated or do you want to be restored? Because with our approach, it's all about restoration. It's not about manipulating hormones or manipulating inflammation or manipulating bowel movements or manipulating your blood pressure. It's about restoring you back to normal, because the normal of the body is health. It's health. So guys, if you are struggling with whatever, whether it be fertility, whether it be hormone issues, thyroid issues, whether it be type 2 diabetes, whether it be weight loss resistance, cancer, whatever it might be, we always say we don't really treat conditions, but we identify the stressors that are causing you to start to adapt. And if you can identify the stressors and start to remove them, the normal natural progression of the body is to restore itself. And that's why coming up at our next talk here, I believe in a couple of weeks, you can go to the very top of the page. It's pinned to our next inflammation talk. And so if you're from the Chicagoland area, please register for that if you haven't been. Many times people say, I want to come see you. And I say, great, just come to the inflammation talk because we literally have probably 50 to 60 people a month that want to come in, but we don't have room for all of those people to be able to serve them with great care and with attention to detail. And so come to the inflammation talk and understand what your first approach is. And at that event, we'll go over inflammation and how it leads to problems with weight loss, cancer, infertility, thyroid disease, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune, and issues with your hormones. And we'll talk about that at that point and then how you can actually get started. So if you're from the Chicagoland area, go to the top of the page, register for that. It's going to be at 6:15. I'm still unsure of what the date is, but it says on the top of the page, we have it pinned. And that will take you to our registration page, and then get registered for it, and we'll see you on that Tuesday night at 6:15. And you can start the journey in order to becoming restored versus manipulated. So guys, I hope you have a great night. I hope you enjoyed your Labor Day. Make sure you also share this video. Make sure you comment where you're watching from, and if you're watching the replay, again, always put replay so that I know where people are watching from. Again, my name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with Exemplify Health Center, a Wellness Way affiliate. I hope you have an awesome night. I hope you have an awesome rest of your week. Be well, be blessed, and remember who you are.